Hello and welcome to the Honest Not Perfect podcast. My name is Suzanne Ellingham and I'm the director of Source Events, the platform that helps connect retailers, brands and wholesalers to manufacturers and makers globally.
And my name is Jack Stratton. I'm director of Insider Trends. We are a global retail trend spotting agency helping brands to spot what's coming next.
Hello and welcome to Honest Not Perfect, where myself and Jack talk to people within fashion and retail who are doing brilliant things just a little bit differently. And we get a chance to dive under the surface of their journey and share some of that insight with you. Today, we're joined by Matt Dehaty, who before recently stepping into a founder role, which we're going to come to in a minute at OldNovo, was the head of product management and buying director over at Gymshark. And before that, spent 13 years at Nike. Two behemoth brands that have amazing, immense brand recognition communities that tap into storytelling and engagement in a way that most other retailers and brands just envy. I think we're going to cover quite a bit of ground. So Matt, welcome. We're going to start off with an easy question. How did you land in buying? Where did it start for you? Because you've had an interesting journey into Nike and then through into Gymshark.
Yeah, there was never a plan to be a buyer.
Never
that was certainly not my plan. I was a rugby player when I was a kid, and that was always the real plan. I wanted to be a sportsman. And the step into Nike was just, this is a big company, and they happened to sponsor the England rugby team at the time. So it seemed like a brand that I'd want to work for.
Yeah.
And then another coincidence was that the UK head office was in Washington, in the Northeast, right near where I was at university. Yeah. So I landed a role there in what was called customer service. But the customers, I thought that would be like direct to consumer type, like answering emails and phone calls. The customers were actually retailers, and I didn't realize that. I landed the role and was sending emails and moving product from Lackdal, the Nike European warehouse, to those retailers in the UK. So it's people like Pro Direct Soccer, it's still around today. Manchester United, Arsenal. So it was a big, steep learning curve, but the first thing I learned in that role was that I didn't want to keep doing that. I remember being presented on the very first week in onboarding, and I still know the guy, his name's Neil, and I remember him presenting the new Premiership football that day, and he sort of stood there with the ball in his hand and was talking about why it was rounder and faster and you could strike it more true. And that was the moment I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to be the person that talks about and evangelizes product.
That's cool.
So that sort of led me to various different roles in the UK that made me move from the Northeast down to London to Amsterdam, where I eventually ended up working physically on product. And my title in Nike was product line management. It's
what
it's
did that
close.
mean?
Yeah, it's not. It's. I think that the reason I got the role was because I understood the sport and the consumer really well. Part of the job in Amsterdam was looking after global product management for rugby union, along with a bunch of other weird and wonderful sports like handball and ice hockey. But in that rugby role, the reason they took a chance on me getting the role was because I'd played the sport at a pretty high level and actually understood what the consumer really needed. The product line management for me in that particular role was understanding what the athlete and the consumer actually wanted. Now, it's not a great leap to move from there to product marketing, and eventually I found my way back to Gymshark in the UK after a brief stint in North America. And that was the title at that point, product marketing. Yeah. And Gymshark is you mentioned it's a behemoth. It's a really big company, but at that point in time when I joined, it was a lot smaller.
Yeah.
And the product marketing title was a broad term that meant basically touching the product at all points of the supply chain. It was what should we make and who's it for? It was that whole spectrum. Yeah. So again, the reason I think I was successful in that job was because I knew what the consumer wanted. That was really the number one thing on the job description. Just what.
It's amazing how many people don't keep that front of mind, and I think that's where we start to see brands diverging from some of their core values or their core audiences. Is that do you know your customer? Like I think we had the brand director from Pepsi, the creative director. She'll kill me for forgetting her name. But she said something in one of these sessions, and she said, I know who my customers are. In my head, I play them through, and I know what they look like, and I know how they're going to react. And it was just that real clarity of this is my customer. This is how they'll react.
Well, and
I think
the ultimate way of knowing the customer is having people like you who actually were the customer, right? With the rugby point is, I mean, there is no better way. I've heard a lot of good stories about Nike. I'd be interested if you saw a lot of examples of that, about Nike employing people who played that sport, not necessarily pros, but at a high level, or really obsessed with the sports that they were working with.
Yeah.
Because I wonder how much that's a part of the success, because there's no better way than knowing the customer, right, than if you played the sport. Yeah,
there is no better way. I remember having a conversation with somebody who was the general manager of training at one point, and he talked about how Nike is in a privileged position where they can ask for both. You can be both a career specialist and understand how to make product, but also having played the sport to some level. Nike's lucky enough to ask for both.
Yeah.
So if you think about the early days of Nike, everyone was a runner, surrounded by runners. That's self-explanatory now. But when you're on campus now, you're surrounded by people that have got some sort of connection to the sport or to the brand. Now, that could be sneaker culture. They could be collectors that are just purely from the fashion lens or lifestyle lens. But more often than not, there's a backstory in sports somewhere.
Yeah.
I mentioned the general manager of training at the time. I'm not sure whether I should mention his name or not, but he was a passionate CrossFit person. He was involved in training himself, and I'm sure you won't mind me telling the story, but I know that he was the person that sort of launched the idea of the Nike Metcon, which is if you're involved in the sport, there's a certain type of footwear you have to use. One example is that when you're climbing a rope, the outsoles and the midsoles can tear through if you slide down a rope. It's very niche and very nuanced, but it's a problem if you're an actual athlete, and he understood that, and he pitched the idea of creating the shoe, and ended up being probably the number one shoe in training. And that came from him actually understanding the sport. Now, he doesn't get the opportunity to make that unless he's got the credibility of a career behind him. But it was similar with me playing rugby to a high level, and then understanding what players actually wanted on field. It's not always what you'd assume and not what you'd think. There was the best example in rugby from Nike for me was around the length of socks for training. You just assume rugby socks are always up to your knee, but when you actually play, it's like, why do you wear long socks for training? We offered them shorter socks. It's a really simple difference, but instead of them wearing a white or black crew sock for training, it was team-coloured crew socks for training.
It's just the small, obvious things that are obvious to you, but maybe wouldn't be obvious to somebody who wasn't as ingrained in that sport.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Other examples from one thing when you were talking about asking for both. One of the phrases we had at Gymshark was about astronomers and astronauts. And it's a nice little catchphrase, yeah. So you're not just studying the stars, but you've also been there. That's a nice way to put it.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I can really picture that at Gymshark. It's like Gymshark as a business always feels from the outside that it's a business that is really, really good at taking not just customers, but everyone who works there on this same journey.
Yeah.
And everyone, I always think that to some degree is how you create a cult brand. It's like everyone has to buy into this idea as much as possible. You almost can't have people that don't. Did it feel like that? Like kind of, and also I suppose I'm interested in, how was that similar or different to Nike, that kind of culture? Because obviously it's a totally different size business, but did you see similarities, or was it like worlds apart?
Well, there's two parts to that. They're culturally very different, and very different companies at different stages of their life cycle. But the first thing you remind me of was my interview for Nike. I remember I asked the hiring manager whether they were involved in sport, and were they excited by sport? Did they take part in running or whatever? And I remember her laughing at me and going, "No, not at all," which was interesting. And at that point in time, Nike was probably 40 years old. Gymshark is very different, of course. The first visible difference that I noticed was the age. The average age in the company when I joined, I think, was about 27, 28 years old.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, I'd gone from being somebody that had been in a company for over 10 years, but yet felt like somebody that was relatively young, to becoming somebody that was relatively old and being surrounded by people with way less experience than me. And you were absolutely surrounded by people that lived and breathed the gym, But at the same time, there was lots of people that didn't.
Yeah.
And their journeys into the gym were very, very different as well. I'd love to talk about this as well, because my entry into training and into the gym was from a performance side. I'd wanted to lift weights because I wanted to be a better rugby player.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's, of course, not the same story as Ben's. Ben's journey into lifting weights was because he wanted to change the way he looked. He wanted to build his muscles and have abs and that sort of thing. But the vast majority of people that actually train today, and the biggest audience, is the people that train because they realize it's good for them.
Yes.
That's it. And if you think about the base of a triangle, most people in there are just starting their journey, or they're on social media and they realize that it's good for them and it's good for their health. Doctors talk about fitness and
It's part of their lifestyle.
Yeah, but also it's fun. And you can hang out with people that are in the same. There's running culture right now with loads of run clubs, and the gym's been like that for a while. It's somewhere you can go and hang out with people that you see, and it's can be the best hour of your day sometimes when you just that blow off some cobwebs and let off some steam. In the gym.
I think that at its absolute best, when I'm sort of thinking, about what Gymshark has done more broadly in retail, at its best. They're one of the only brands I've ever seen that have managed to that extent to make something that was really niche, really accessible, but remain just as cool and cult and interesting. That's a hell of a feat to do that. I think people often kind of think, well, if you make something accessible, lots of brands do that. But lots of brands do that, but they also maintain that feel where it was this amazing club that you want to be part of.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that was incredibly... I've always thought that's amazing. I think about the Regent Street flagship still when I go in there. It's extraordinary because if I walk in there, and I use the gym a bit just purely because I think, I read something a long time ago that, I might get arthritis in my 50s if I don't lift weights occasionally. I'm coming from that almost like from fear. And I walk into that store, and the funny thing is, I feel like I'm sort of talked to in exactly the same way as the 18-year-old who is just, an absolute monster who comes in and, lives and breathes the gym. We're treated the same. Yeah. And I always think that's an extraordinary thing to balance both those things.
Yeah, it's
from the inside out. Is that how conscious was that, and how do you think Gymshark is able?
I mean, the people that are running the brand side of things at Gymshark are very smart, and they do live and breathe the gym, and there's a conscious decision to be as inclusive as possible. I think there was a phrase that we were very aware of called gym intimidation. Where you just used the word monster to describe the person. It's interesting. There is a stereotype perhaps that the people that are big and scary in the gym actually don't want to talk to anybody, and they've got this. You're picturing the guy with their hoodie on and their headphones, and they don't talk to anybody and they put their head down. But once you open the doors a little bit and you talk to them. Opening
the floodgates.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so there's a conscious decision not to alienate any group at all.
Yeah.
And one that I think the brand would be very proud of. It's great that you've talked about going into the Regent Street store and feeling that way.
Honestly, and to the extent that I would say, and I've known many people say similar things, that actually they're surprised by that.
Right.
And even I've heard stories of people saying that's been part of why they've started feeling more comfortable, going to the gym.
Yeah.
And it becomes more of part of their routine. And you start thinking of it differently as well. I think of it differently now. I quite like going to the gym. I enjoy it. It's like a nice part of my day. That was unthinkable 5 years ago.
Isn't it?
Just, and I'm not... I just can tell that lots of, Gymshark is part of something that's changed in the last sort of, maybe, I don't know how many years. And I think, in terms of, something beyond just selling stuff, should be really proud of that.
Yeah, and there's a wave and a trend coming. Well, it's here, really. I like to think about the analogy to taking a shower and brushing your teeth. It's daily hygiene, and it's something people do. And I feel like fitness and health is just that, going for a daily walk or run or get steps, that's coming now, and people understand that it's something they should be doing.
Yeah.
And I'd love to think that in 10, 15 years from now, it would be seen as daily hygiene. Like, you take a shower, you brush your teeth, you go for a run.
Yeah, it's fascinating how it's changed culturally. Yeah, there's a fitness trainer at my gym when I started, just literally to understand how things worked. And I remember he said to me, he said, because I sort of co-coach my son's football team.
Oh, great.
And we were talking about goals or whatever with it, and I went, "Oh, I don't know. I don't really know what I'm doing." And he said, "You say you play football with your son. You've coached the team." And I said, "Yeah." We said, "When the goal is making sure you can do that for until you're 70 or something. That's the goal."
Yeah.
And that was interesting because I had never thought about it in those terms. I was always like, "Oh, just getting strong, whatever." And you realise, no, it's hygiene, it's health, it's
making sure your body still works in 15, 20 years.
Precisely. And then exactly to your point, then being a business that can sit underneath all that change is a really powerful thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's a long-term bet that, alongside Colgate or I don't know, Dove soap, a Gymshark pair of shorts to go and train in at the gym is something you associate with.
Yeah.
The other thing, when obviously Gymshark started as a men's brand. Ben was making clothes for himself and his friends to wear, but when I arrived, the vast majority of the product was sold to female consumers, and over half the business was women's. So that there's a different subculture in women's training than there is from men's. It's completely different, and they're very, very similar motivations, but the look and the feel and the consumers have different mentalities, I feel.
That's fascinating. Actually, so from back to buying, what you just described as those different sort of idiosyncrasies attached to, the female products at Gymshark and the male. And of course, thinking about Nike in the same way, different sports, different genders. How did that influence what you were doing at the buying end of things? The products you were sourcing, or, how you were thinking about that?
Well, the first piece of feedback I ever got in my product management role at Nike was that I kept leaning on my own personal experience too much. Her name was Nicola, and she was the designer at the time, and she that was good feedback for me, because my an answer to anything was, well, rugby players want this, but it was coming just straight out the back of my head. I wasn't doing the work of going and finding out and talking to the actual people. And of course, when I moved to the US, I was pulled out of a sport that I knew I'd played for 20 years and put into American football, which I knew nothing about, never really watched. And in my first week in the US, I was standing on the touchline. I should call it a sideline, actually. The sideline of the American football field, watching the Seattle Seahawks, and surrounded by pros at the highest level. And I thought, I really need to understand the sport better. The first product I ever made was a women's sports bra. It was for track and field, and it was, where do you start? Same thing happened when I came to Gymshark. It was very easy for me to be able to use my own personal preferences as an answer, but when I'm talking about the women's side of the business, it's a completely different perspective. I have to take myself out of it and go through the actual process of talking to consumers. Gymshark was in a beautiful situation where the amount of data on the consumer is huge compared to, there's data on basically every customer they've had, because it's been digital from day one.
Yeah, it's great.
Whereas Nike was always a bit separated from that, predominantly a wholesale business for that time. And it was very difficult as a Nike product line manager trying to find out what a American football consumer from a high school wants versus Gymshark. They could tell you average age, how many times they've shopped, lifetime value. And you want to speak to them? Yeah, we can send them a note, and we could.
It's the difference between a digitally native business.
It was fascinating.
Huge brand.
It's incredible. And did that influence a lot? Did that feel really different on the ground at Gymshark to Nike? So, for example, would you be working quite close with that digital team when you're making those buying decisions?
Yeah, there was a large customer insights team at that point in time when I joined, and I was used to using focus groups and panels where you'd have a small group of people that would represent a larger group. Gymshark had the luxury of being able to say, forget the small group, I can just tell you what most people are thinking. And it was kind of frustrating to begin with, because I want to go talk to an individual and get some color behind the insights and understand their thoughts and feelings. Yeah. It was also a luxury that we were able to say, well, here's your average consumer, and this is everything that they are into, and those insights. There was two very different ways of doing things. Yeah, it's a nice. It would be nice to balance both and be able to do both.
Just thinking, it's the difference between data-led personas old school research-led personas, the ones where actually you have gone and spoken to, and I think you do need both, because I think one of the challenges when you're constantly looking at data and when you're in that product role and you need to be close to your customers is you need to be able to visualize them. And sometimes that visualization is your perfect customer you've spoken to, and it just adds that different way of thinking. But I think it's a huge luxury to have that level of data. Would you say that was one of the biggest differences between what Nike were doing in Gymshark, just the sheer volume of customer data and insight that they had at their fingertips and how they were using it?
I felt overwhelmed to begin with the amount of data.
Wow.
Yeah.
It was I'd gone from having almost none to having as much as I possibly could want. So it was kind of that was a stark contrast.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing for me personally was I'd gone from doing a relatively an extremely refined, very small cog in a huge machine to touching a large portion of the product and being able to do lots of different things. It was like, what should we make? And how do we describe it on the website, Matt? And how should we shoot the product? Another comparison is just, let's talk about lunchtime. I remember I ate by myself, not for want of, there was no one to eat with. I was surrounded by people, but didn't know most of them. And I'd go to the canteen, I'd grab my food, I'd eat, sit down and go back to my desk and work. And then work with people that I was friends with at Nike. Gymshark has a long benches that sort of feels a bit like Hogwarts, and people would all sit and eat next to each other, and it was really cool because you could be sitting next to one of the chiefs or one of the interns, and you'd have lunch.
Brilliant.
And those are conscious decisions to make things as inclusive as possible for the staff.
But that's our time to just have those conversations, and I feel like when we work in really larger businesses, sometimes they call them the water cooler moments where you'd have a gossip, but we don't really have those anymore. And meetings are constant all day. And I think I'm probably pretty bad for this. I think I maybe have lunch with my team about once or twice a month because we now work remote. We're hybrid working in the office all the time at the same time. And I wonder how much of culture that really it becomes part of. And it was just really interesting when you said there about lunch and it's a conscious decision. Just came back to that, and she said it's one of her biggest successes. And I wonder how many businesses have that culture, because I don't think it's as many as we think.
Well, I remember the first office at Nike in Washington, just outside of Sunderland. The lady that served breakfast to everybody, her name was Jean. Like, that was 16 years ago, and I still remember her name.
Yeah,
sort of proves your point that you'd sit down and have breakfast with people and you remember them.
Yeah. Completely, and how important this is, whatever you're doing, and it makes me also think, we touched on these kinds of things already in the conversation, but back to say the point about you as a buyer at Gymshark and that digital team, and the fact that in a lot of businesses, particularly and not necessarily by design, but traditional retail businesses with lots of stores, they might not have that connection of someone in a buying role with maybe the digital team or the insights team or the data team or whatever, or even the e-com business, say, that a newer business does. But you realise it's partly just having them physically together. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like a big business is those people might be sat in different parts of the office or in different cities completely. Yeah. But just designing physical ways that people can be. The amount of conversations I have with people who work with physical stores. Yeah. And they essentially almost work in a different business completely to the e-com guys, even though we all know, like Gymshark, know really well. Almost in competition, Gymshark, and it's very obvious to everyone now that if Gymshark opens a store, that's going to give e-com a bump, right? Yeah, whether people are buying in the store or not, they're then going online and they're buying. Yeah. So those teams need to be speaking a lot. Yeah. And I'll bet at Gymshark they were speaking. They were kind of, connecting.
Yeah. And again, it's easy to do when there's 300 people, and I went through a phase where I scaled right up to 1,000 people. It's probably around 900,000 people there right now, and it becomes more difficult in big offices to get people to physically sit next to each other. Yeah. But you made me think about not just brick and mortar versus e-com, but also retail. Like speaking to retailers. So we opened a space in Selfridges, and being able to speak to a buyer at Selfridges about what's happening and trending is something as well that you miss on the flip side. That after it was probably 4 or 5 years in that we started having those conversations. I remembered how much information you get from retailers that you wouldn't get. Yeah. That Gymshark wasn't getting.
It's so interesting. I remember that. I remember visiting the concession at Selfridges. Yeah. How good it was. How interesting it was to me, because it seemed a bit more premium than the rest of the range. Yeah. Which was perfect at Selfridges. And I remember thinking, and I don't know how much information you'd have on that, but I remember thinking, is this a different customer, or is this, your kind of top tier Gymshark cult who are like, they're just so excited to see it somewhere else and they're going there? Or was it both, maybe?
A blend of both. Initially, we actually created a range specifically for that moment, and it was the most premium product we've ever made.
It was brilliant.
Really, really nice stuff. And that was, we have to show up in a certain way in a store with that reputation. But actually, I remember, it shouldn't surprise me as a buyer, but one of the things that surprised the company, I guess, was that it was the best sellers and core products that were selling to our regular customer were also the best sellers in that space.
Really?
We showed up in a way that we thought the Selfridges consumer would respect and would resonate with. But actually being ourselves was probably the right thing to do in the end. And I think the space has changed a little bit since then as well. Having new destinations for Gymshark is really important. And there's no better store, certainly in the UK, to do that.
No, totally. I think it'd be really nice to ask you about your new brand and also the journey that you've taken into that. I think we've touched a lot on this already. I can't really think of a better grounding for launching a new clothing brand than doing what you did with Nike, learning how one of the biggest sports clothing brands in the world did business, then going into one of the fastest growing, most known.
To be completely hands-on.
Completely hands-on, totally different. I mean, to me, it makes entire sense that you then went out on your own because you've got the perfect grounding. But of course, I'm just assuming that. I don't know what the reality's been like. No, it doesn't. Exactly. So look, tell us a bit about the new business. I know it's literally just launched, and what that journey to starting it from where you've been has been like.
I'm not spiritual at all, but it does feel a little bit like this was the thing I was meant to do.
Yeah.
My mum used to always say to me, "Everything happens for a reason, Matthew," and it used to really frustrate me when she said that.
Especially when she turned out to be right.
Yeah. I carry the values of rugby, and it was I've come full circle. The reason I started, as I said, at Nike was because I resonated with the England rugby team. They were World Cup winners at that point in time, and wanted to work there because of rugby. And after about 8 years, ended up working on rugby products at Nike, and played in Amsterdam. That was the last time I played rugby, and then moved to the US and got detached from that and had this pull and this feel to come back to the UK. And my competitive outlet had moved away from being on field to being preparation for sport. It was lifting weights and training and running and everything that comes with that. But somehow deep down, I still feel like a rugby player. I still feel like that the values of the game were what
sports love. It never goes away.
Yeah, it's strange. Circumstances in my life meant that I was moved back to the northeast, back to Newcastle, my hometown, and then started to get sucked back into that lifestyle in the northeast. And of course, Gymshark's in the Midlands. Yeah. And I'd started to realise that there was a moment I was going to have to leave Gymshark, and it was a place that I loved working. I had met my partner, and we had a daughter together, and there's another one on the way. And it was Newcastle is where I'm going to be living the rest of my life. And I started to think about what's the thing that I'm going to be doing in the northeast. And a friend of mine challenged me for a New Year's resolution to write about something, because I was working out anyway. So a New Year's resolution about running is not going to work for me. And I thought, what can I write about that's true, that's about me? And it ended up being about apparel, the intersection of apparel and rugby. And I started talking about amazing rugby jerseys through the past. There's a fun fact that Patagonia's first piece of apparel was a rugby shirt. So I started writing weekly blog posts about these things, and one of them got picked up by a social media account called Counterruck, and they're a group of guys around the world that write about the culture of rugby. And they, on a phone call, they said to me, why do you not? Matt, you used to work for Nike and Gymshark. Why is no one doing anything with rugby?
Yes.
I was like, yeah. And then I sort of went, oh, why is it not me?
Yeah.
And it was that purpose sort of.
That little moment.
It was a light shone on me, and I thought, this is the thing that I'm supposed to be doing, and why don't I think about how this might work? So I started writing about it and started thinking about what the brand could be. And I think I've probably got. I think about 24, maybe two 2 years worth of stories around rugby jerseys that I'd like to tell. And I think the jersey itself is having a moment. It's fashionable at the moment, but it's almost being stolen by fashion and by lifestyle, and it's grounded in the sport. And there's 200 years worth of history and heritage to talk about. And I've sort of plotted out the next 2 years, and I think there's more than enough stories to talk about that are grounded in the sport or even in hip hop culture, for example. There's Ralph Lauren's resurging again with preppy culture and preppy style.
Absolutely.
The idea is for OldNovo to be a lifestyle brand grounded in the values and the culture around rugby. And I hope that because I've played the sport and I know how to make apparel, that I can be the one to try and bring that to life.
I think it's that authenticity. That's what will make the difference for you. Because like you say, I don't even know one story about rugby heritage. And I think if you're linking those stories and that history to a product, and you've got, say, a story for each product or something that's inspired it, I think they're the things that consumers connect with. And I think it's that authenticity at the core of your brand and your business, is somebody who just loves the sport and wants to celebrate it through fashion and identity. And it is that. And I suspect the first people on your buy-in list are probably that group of guys who are reading the blogs, and that's how that's how it spreads. That's how people just fall in love with products, and they fall in love with the story. And we talk so much about storytelling in retail and how some people just do that inherently better than others. And I suspect you'll be pretty good at it.
That's positive to hear.
I'd like to hope so. After so long at product marketing at Nike and Gymshark, being a massive rugby enthusiast and now starting a rugby business.
Totally compelling. And also, I think what's really interesting for me is all of that, but equally, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, partly my job is looking at brands and trends and, what kinds of things are in the ether. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, running brands. It's just so saturated. And not to say that a lot of them aren't great or won't still be able to find niches, because it's a growing community around the world. There are lots of runners. Yeah. But actually, there are a lot of people who really like rugby. Yeah, there is. Rugby's one of those, and rugby's one of those funny things. I don't know whether you'd think of it as like a subculture or something, but it feels to me like it's one of those interesting parts of the culture where it doesn't diminish. Do you know what I mean? It never gets the press of football and other sports. Yeah. And yet, every time I've been to rugby games occasionally, I'm more of a football fan. Yeah. I like cricket. I love team sport full stop, so I could go and watch any kind of sport. But I think you think about rugby, and that fan base is just consistently there. Whatever trends are going, it's like there's always people. Maybe that's a family thing, because it feels like people are always getting into rugby when their family's been into it. I don't know. But it's one of those consistent things. So it really surprises me that there aren't more lifestyle rugby brands. You may well have fallen on a great little niche there. Yeah, I mean, it's. I sort of fight this battle with myself, and I think, there's other waves that are happening right now. Yeah. So golf is a good example as well as running, where there's I could probably name 10 golf brands that are doing exactly what I would like to do in rugby. Yeah. And then I sort of say, well, why am I telling people that I'm doing this thing? Because I'm on a podcast talking about this idea, but there's so much runway in rugby. I mean, there's since I've started talking about it, I've come across and discovered maybe 5 or 6 that are sort of in the same position as me, that are doing a good job of talking about the culture and the lifestyle. And each of them looks and feels very different. There's one in France, which is very similar to what I'd like to do, but it's based in France, and I think that will naturally mean that we'll delineate quite well. The runway is enormous. It's an enormous sport that is still growing. Yeah. The women's game is the fastest growing team sport in the world. Yeah. It'll be a men's brand to begin with, because we talk about authenticity. Just thinking about the recent coverage of the Women's World Cup, it's been enormous.
Pretty certain it's the World Cup final next week.
Yeah, against Canada. And
one of my friends is going to that match, which is why I was just like going,
And did you know what? In the ether again, people talking, that so much response has been people watching it for the first time, and just like women's football saying, this is really entertaining actually. Like there's lots of scoring, there's not necessarily that thing sometimes in men's rugby where it's so technical. And so, there's that element of lots of points and lots of scoring, and it's moving fast, and you can understand it, and so you can sense the energy with women's rugby, which is great.
I read a stat this morning on the way down that the Women's Rugby World Cup is bigger than the Men's Rugby League World Cup.
Oh, wow.
Which is, in terms of audience...
how exciting is that for you?
That's massive.
Yeah. it's that's not to diminish what's happening in rugby league, but it just shows that there's like a swell of passionate rugby supporters happening.
And not to generalise, but slightly again with our source caps on, we're always interested in any businesses where there's the possibility of building really good product into the business, right? And the great thing is, big generalisation, but let's face it, like rugby is largely a sport followed by people who care about that sort of thing.
Yeah,
who have some affluence, and actually they want to own something that, I get the sense is the kind of person that probably really loves that rugby jersey they've had for 30 years.
Yeah.
Or that product that really tells a story that's a heritage and lasts. So, you'll know much more about that than me, but there's the real reason there to make really good product.
Yeah, so Ralph Lauren did they had a brand that was based in rugby. They had a store in New York that was around.
Yeah, I remember this. Yeah.
I believe that they have the domain rugby.com. Which is really interesting. So
That's
interesting. They'd be the last people I'd...
That the preppy thing is huge, isn't it?
And they're recognizing that happening right now, and they've just released curated vintage rugby jerseys. It was one of their most recent posts about here's I think it's 12 rugby jerseys that tell the story of Ralph Lauren rugby, which I think is fascinating.
That's really cool.
So they're recognizing this trend that's coming as well. But I sort of see two consumers. There's not just the ones that used to play. And this is like the people that used to play, the legacy lifetime rugby players that sort of respect. This is me. There's somebody that used to play that likes the culture and the values. But there's also a wave of people that are coming through the sport right now that are, I'd say, underserved. There's the global endemic huge brands that show up on field through replica kit.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's anything off the field. There's no lifestyle product for the young, youthful rugby players that are coming through. Like there's some amazing talent, and I see what they're wearing. These are pro players.
Yeah.
They're not wearing rugby brands in the street. They're wearing sportswear. They're wearing brands like Cole Buxton and Represent. And there's no rugby there. There's no reason why that consumer couldn't be wearing a true rugby brand.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, you can see the low-level influence of a sort of rugby style everywhere, though. Absolutely everywhere.
Yeah.
From even thinking really hip sort of streetwear brands like Aimé Leon Dore, there's a preppy feel to what they're doing. It's not a rugby shirt, but it's not a million miles from it.
It's not.
That's the other interesting thing. I think you could have some overlap with that as well, which I think is great because then you've got runway in terms of sort of the hip hop thing, a kind of streetwear thing, which is really nice.
Yeah.
And again, because that hasn't been massively explored in the way that I think you're absolutely right when it comes to running or golf, even tennis, it feels like there's a lot of that that's already happened.
Apparently, Tommy Hilfiger, it was I forget his name. I should remember this. It may have been. Sorry, Tommy Hilfiger released a rugby jersey in New York, and Snoop Dogg was going on Saturday Night Live to perform Gin and Juice.
Yeah.
And he needed something cool to wear. And at that point in time, there was a culture in New York about going and stealing Ralph Lauren or a preppy product and wearing it. And he'd recognized this, and he wore a red, white, and blue Tommy Hilfiger jersey on stage.
Wow.
And the next that weekend, it was sold out from coast to coast, that jersey. And there's a really, really nice story about how that. I think the gang was called the Lowlifes, and the Lowlife gang in New York were taking rugby jerseys and other preppy pieces to represent a culture that they wanted to be part of or to sort of steal from. And I thought that was really interesting. And
it's kind of a subculture.
Yeah, definitely. There's the ALD reference is directly referencing that history. That's because they are trying to be a little bit like a Ralph Lauren of now.
Yes,
and that's where you're seeing the twill collar show up a little bit more, is referencing that time in the 90s.
That's awesome.
By the way, there's so much written and on YouTube about that whole moment.
I feel like this is a Wikipedia hole waiting for.
Yeah, I could probably go down a rabbit hole and talk about this.
Well, what's really nice, just from my side of things, is again, you're talking about it being sort of some of those consumers being underserved or some of this sort of niche being underexplored. It's not something. It's something I suppose now that you talk about it, I feel aware of, but it's not something I've thought about a lot. And it's an obvious thing to say, but that feels like a very, very smart business
Yeah.
or a smart place to launch a business into. You know, potentially you've hit the sweet spot of something that's actually needed, but far more importantly, something that really, really speaks to everything you care about and everything you've done. I think that's the thing.
What's the thing that excites you most about the business? Taking away the runway, what in, say, 5 years, if everything goes to plan, what will be the thing that you will be happiest with? Where would you want to be? Two questions there in one, and I've mushed them together.
The thing that I'm enjoying the most at the moment is I'm learning so much and getting to sink my teeth into things that I would never expected to be doing. This, for example, is very different from what my day job was. You know, I'm having to do things like trademarks and setting up DHL and FedEx accounts and things like that. Somebody else would have taken care of that now, and I'm getting to do that. That's really interesting, and it's a lot like when I did a triathlon, where I had to learn how to ride a bike properly, and what does a transition look like, and how do you swim, like pulling
All
from
at the
lots
same
of different, like different areas of expertise I'm having to learn from. I'm really enjoying that, and I don't expect that to change in the next 5 years. I'd expect that probably will be the same.
Yeah.
I would love. I mean, it's 2031 is the Rugby World Cup will be in LA.
Yeah.
There is one in between, which is in Australia. But in the back of my mind, I've got LA 2031 as a huge marketplace that will be invested in thinking about rugby, and I'd love to be involved in that in a much bigger way.
Well, there we go.
That's fascinating. I didn't realise it was going to be in LA. That's just a huge moment for rugby, full stop. Yeah.
The States know how to really put on a show.
Absolutely.
And I think if rugby continues on the trajectory it is, especially in the women's game, I can't see them not really shining a light on the sport in a really cool way.
Yeah.
It opens up that US market, because when I think of US, I think American football.
Yeah.
I don't think of rugby. But actually, if you think in 2031 there's a Rugby World Cup there, you'll naturally get such a wave of new people who are becoming aware of the sport.
Yeah. The States know
Whole
how
new
to change
market.
perceptions. It really isn't that long ago that soccer was just this thing that kids played, right, in America.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking about. I forget the year that it was in the Football World Cup. Was it 90?
94.
94.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's where yes, it's staggered and it's maybe 30 years behind, but that's where.
It's such a good point, because actually now when I talk to people, if I talk to my mates about World Cups, we remember. That's probably the one, like USA 94, but it's because they gave it the Hollywood treatment.
Yeah.
So it was so exciting. So it will be the same in 2031. Everyone will be watching, and it'll be amazing.
I hope so.
Such a great timeline as well. 5 years.
There's enough that will probably vanish pretty quickly, that time. But
you'll have a lot to do between now and then.
Yeah, but I think in the back of my mind, I think that's the moment I'm sort of ramping up towards. But there's some basics I've got to put in place before.
I think once you've got the basics and you start, I think you've had almost what I would say sounds like a bit of a baptism of fire over at Gymshark, where it was we're going to go in. I don't know how to do this yet, but kind of do. Now I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to figure it out. And I kind of feel like if you can survive that experience, then this is just the same learning curve. The difference is this time you get the creative direction to make the decisions.
Yeah.
That's kind of both probably exciting and terrifying in equal measures, depending on what time of the week it is.
Yeah, I don't need to ask permission to do anything anymore. I need to just sort of rationalize in my own head, is it the right thing to do or not? Which is, it's quite often you find yourself in your career, you back your own decisions and you try to persuade people that this is the right thing to do, and then you become tied to that idea.
Yeah.
I don't have to be tied to any idea now. I can change my mind anytime I want, and then sort of...
There's a freedom in that.
There's some freedom, but it's the responsibility of like, well, I really need to think about how I spend every pound.
Yes.
And that's fascinating and interesting, and it's put a different perspective on working with somebody like Ben about what it must have been like to start. Yeah, because I had a role at Nike which is called Ekin. It's Nike spelled backwards, and we used to evangelize and talk about the brand a lot. And then I was working at Gymshark where I was talking about Nike as a brand when it was.
Yeah.
I used to tell the origin story and how it grew. But then I experienced that firsthand at Gymshark.
You were in the origin story.
I was part of that.
Yeah.
And it was already well on its way when I arrived. But now I'm literally at that very start doing it myself, which is absolutely fascinating.
And what's really cool now is, I think, because of one of the for all its complexity, one of the great things about how everything works now, including commerce, is that everything is, because of our kind of always-on culture, because everyone is sharing their story, that becomes part of every kind of sort of business model or growing a business. So now, I mean, you joked a second ago about this is new, coming on and doing this, but actually now this will be as much a part of it as, you know, learning who's going to deliver your products.
Yeah.
You'll find that all of a sudden...
Other people will want you on their podcast.
No, but the thing is that telling your story, because it's a really important story and also a story that, you know, I know everyone's going to be fascinated in hearing someone from Nike and then Gymshark who sets up a new clothing business. That's a very interesting story.
Yeah.
But actually telling that story is not an egotistical thing. Telling that story is going to actually be part of how you grow the business as well, because people buy into this now. I'm thinking, again, we mentioned them earlier, but Batch London, Sam and Julian, they talk, to be honest, they talk as much, and I love it, but they talk as much about what it's like running a small business where you make clothes in the UK. They talk as much about that as they do, you know, just marketing for their stuff.
You'll find within the founders community, which is what I would say you're definitely part of, like the problems you're coming up against will be the ones that they will probably laugh at and say, oh yeah, no, we went through that too. Yeah. And sometimes there's a power in knowing other people feel that pain or see that opportunity. Totally. And sometimes when you're having those moments, and I know I've spoken to so many people who've started their own business. They do have those moments where you think, I must be crazy. It's like everyone has them. And sometimes you just need to have a really great network of people around you that you can pick up the phone to when you need to like rant. Because fundamentally, it doesn't matter how successful your business is, you will still have those moments where you think, oh my God, I must be crazy.
Yeah.
And it'll often just be triggered by a really stupid thing, like an order's been delayed with DHL or it's not coming in. It's just, it happens. But I think hearing your story, what's really interesting is that you are in the right place at the right time for your brand. And actually, you know, it's a really nice inspirational story to get somebody who's making that leap now, as opposed to, in fact, we might bring you back in a few years. But actually, and just say, you know, 2 or 3 years, you'll learn so much. It'll be such a different journey, but be a really fun one.
Yeah.
I sent a note to somebody that I guess I'm sort of inspired by. Is a former pro rugby league player. His name's Levi Brown, and he's based in Australia, I believe. And he started a company called Earl's Collection. And I sent him a note on LinkedIn, speculatively, and just said, any advice? And he said it essentially came to just start, and life's too short not to try. And I sort of screenshotted that and thought, there is really no downside to me trying it right now.
Nope.
It's the backdrop in the industry at the moment is that it's probably easier than ever to try and do this now, which I fully recognise. It's incredibly exciting, and the people that I'm watching. You talked about creators. I'm watching other people do this and thinking, I'm fascinated by Marcus Milione in New York and what he's doing with Minted, and thinking, well, I could do that with rugby. And I'm seeing Ken Sakata, who's got a company called Front Office, again from Australia. He's a former doctor that's now started a really, really good premium lifestyle brand. Thinking they're laying out the roadmap of how to do this. It's just a case of me changing the subject matter to something that's closer to me. And
it's one of the things that's at the heart of our show, actually, is that I think when we've launched it 3 years ago, I literally said you can go literally from ideation to final product on the show floor. Right. Like there will be factories that I work with and that are on the show floor who have in-house design, who will talk you through how to do your tech pack, send it to the factory. They'll literally walk you through the step. If you've got kind of an idea, or kind of it's where ideas become great products. I think that was the tagline for the first show, actually. Yeah. But it's true. And I think sometimes, you know, and we see it a lot with influencers who are coming into the show now who have no idea, but they know they can sell a product. They've got a vision for it. They just need the backdrop behind it. I think you have that experience. And it's really just going through that brand building stage and doing it yourself. Yep. I think you're going to have a lot of fun over the next few years.
I hope so, yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like there's two parts to it. You need to have a product to sell and someone to sell it to.
Yeah.
I think I'm in a slightly different position from, you mentioned influencers, where they already have an audience. It's like, what am I going to sell them? I know how to make the product.
Yeah.
I need to build an audience. So a lot of what I'm doing right now is just trying to. And sorry, I should say, I know that there is a huge rugby audience out there. That
How do
it
you tap
exists.
into it?
Yeah, it's just how do I let them know that I exist? That's
Yes.
my main aim.
Well, for anyone that's listening who has any ideas, Matt is contactable on LinkedIn. If you have communities in the sports side, reach out.
Funny.
Oh, Matt, I've loved talking to you. I think we're probably at time, but thank you so much for sharing. It's really interesting for us to speak to people who will talk quite openly about their experiences at some of the biggest companies. It's just insight that most people don't really get to hear about. So thank you so much for being so honest and open and for sharing some of your story with us.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been great. I've really enjoyed, I think also your sort of positivity about the journey you've been on, and the fact that you focus completely on all the good things you've taken along the way. And I think it's a nice reminder actually that when you start your own business, I think maybe sometimes for younger people starting businesses, it could be easy to assume that, it's not easy, but you don't necessarily need that much grounding in, the modern world in terms of just launching something. But I'd argue when I speak to people like you, I realise actually there is massive, massive benefit in working for those bigger retailers and doing your grounding there and really learning how it works first. I think that's sometimes undervalued. There's no better, in your world in sports, what better grounding than companies like Nike and Gymshark. So important for people to remember the value of that as well.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks so much, Matt.